Hello and welcome to the second in the Back to Basics video series, which is really just a look back at just the basics, the basic orientation of the firewalls, how things are changing now with SCM as well. You know, when you're managing firewalls with SCM, not everything is in exactly the same place, so we'll have a look at that as well later on in the video. The correlation between the firewall and Panorama, so where we'd find things in the firewall as opposed to where we find things in the Panorama, which is really intuitive. I really like the way they designed that. And it's for people that are new to Palo Alto, who may possibly have done networking before or security before, or people that are just new to it in general and just want to get a feel for it and have that confidence when you're looking at a UI. Possibly for the first time or second time at a company where you're working, if you've managed to get a job and so on within an organisation looking after the firewalls. It's that thing of having that familiarity and not feeling particularly lost. So please hit like and subscribe. It really helps the channel, really helps with the algorithm. And let's get started. Okay, so we'll start with the VM firewall, and here we have a VM firewall, and it's sat currently on the network tab, where we can see the IPsec tunnels and so on. So basically, the network tab, it kind of speaks for itself. We've already done the device tab and so on, but we can just review that as well from a non-management plane side. So we'll start off with network tab because that's where it is. So anything to do with interfaces and zones, anything that's to do with controlling the network, anything like that, you create VLAN objects and then virtual wires in here as well. So virtual wire speaks for itself. It's a virtual wire. It's literally as if you just soldered two wires together. There's the concept of virtual routers, and virtual routers, the best way to describe them is basically like a VRF. If you come from a networking background, then you'll be familiar with VRFs, virtual routing instances. Again, you can leak routes between them, but it's a good way of being able to separate the routing tables and everything. And it's literally as you click into it, you can see that you associate interfaces with a certain routing table. You can see in here as well that there's RIP is supported. There are two types of virtual routers. We'll see the other one in a second. Just go over to another firewall that's got a different one on it. There's a virtual router and there's a logical router. And logical routers is seen as being the advanced routing engine. If you want to swap to that, then you have to select it in device and then set up, and then it does need a reboot. We'll just have a quick look at the firewall that's got a logical router on it. Okay, so this firewall is also a VM, but this is a firewall that's managed by Strata Cloud Manager, and as a prerequisite for the Strata Cloud Manager, the fact it uses logical routers and not VRF. So we see we've got the same format here essentially. We've got logical routers, but now we have routing profiles underneath it that we can use. So you click into it and then you'll create your routing profile there, and then you would reference that within the logical router. If we just go back to it, it's running extremely slow for some reason, so there we go. Okay, so when we go in here, then we have our OSPF, and you see it doesn't support RIP. The virtual router supported RIP. This only supports RIP v2. Okay, so we'll continue on with this one. We won't swap back to the other one because there's no need to at the minute. So we get IPsec tunnels. This is where you configure IPsec VPNs, and they are separate to your IKE gateways as well as being separate to your IKE crypto and IPsec crypto. From a basic perspective, you think of pretty much everything with, I think most things these days, but certainly with Palo Alto firewalls, a lot of things are rolling things up into a single configuration. So when you create your IPsec tunnel, you would create your IPsec tunnel, but you'd already have your tunnel interface, and you'd already have your IKE gateway, or you can configure it from there. There's always the option to configure a new IKE gateway and take through to a new tunnel interface. Proxy IDs are open for debate, frankly, as far as proxy IDs are concerned. The Palo Alto firewall is a route-based firewall. So if you're negotiating with a policy-based firewall, you're going to have to use proxy IDs. What you will find if you don't use proxy IDs between two route-based firewalls is when you look at the SPIs, the security associations, when you look at them, you will see that they've both negotiated an all zeros ID between the pair of them. That won't work for a policy-based VPN, a policy-based firewall, because a policy-based firewall is basically going to say, I've got this subnet that I want to encrypt, and then the other side are going to have to agree with it, and it just won't. They'll just never agree with each other. As a general rule, one side would start to negotiate down, but I mean that's getting more into then the sort of the more complicated side of it. GRE, general routing encapsulation tunnels. Again, this is where you configure your tunnels. This is where you configure your interface that it's hosted on, and the tunnel interface, and so on. And this is where you find your DHCP and your DNS proxy, where you also have DHCP. You can create a DHCP server or a DHCP relay. DNS proxy, using the firewalls, a DNS proxy. Be careful, one of the gotchas with that is the fact that, as a general rule, then when you start to look through logs for any DNS threat logs, the source IP of that is always going to be the firewall, because that's the firewall that's done the lookup. Proxy there, something that's now is now supported, is explicit proxy on the firewall, and you saw there was a bit of a configuration there because it hadn't worked out. I created one, so that's where you create your proxies there. That's where you create your proxies there in that one. Global Protect is, of course, obviously that is the remote access application, remote access name for Palo Alto's remote access tool. You need a portal and a gateway. The portal and the gateway can be hosted on the same device. You can absolutely do that. And the portal is effectively where you get that's where you get the configuration from. So if we go to portals, it's really quick to just give you an orientation. So this is where you're going to create your configuration. Once you've done your authentication and your data collection stuff, effectively it all ends up being in here, and then you create that. And then as you go through to your configs for your application, you've got selection criteria, what OS do I want to give this to, or what user group, so on. And then your app configurations are in there. And then what happens is that then pulls the client, logs onto the portal, pulls down the configuration, then based on the configuration, they will either do the internal host detection, am I on a corporate network, or they'll go to external, and you've got your list of external gateways there, and then you can deal with your priorities and your priority rules and get really granular about it. That's effectively where it is. There's also an option there to install in the local root certificate store, trusted root CAs, and so on, which is very useful if you need to push out a certificate for, say, you need to push out a certificate for SSL decryption, for instance, or something like that. Then you've got your gateways where you configure your gateway, and you configure your gateway here. And again, you've got agent configuration, so you've got the client settings, which are going to be authentication override, for instance. Are you going to generate the cookie? Are you going to accept a cookie? And that's basically to cut down on authentication. IP pools, your split tunneling, you're going to include, exclude. You can have a single portal and a single gateway, I believe, without a license. You can't support Android, you can support Windows and so on without a license. And I believe that domain and application is also licensed, along with other things as well as other parts of it. But you, just as a general rule, and certainly at the time of recording, you can set up a Global Protect with just the license out of the box, just the Global Protect license. Your MDM there is setting up your mobile device management. So if you need to use mobile device management, you can set up the profiles for that there. Clientless apps, clientless app groups. So if you're going to use clientless VPN, so that is hosted on the portal. The user would log into the portal and they would see tiles of things that they can go through to. That's where you'd do that. And then app groups kind of speaks for itself as a group of apps. QoS. So your QoS policies. QoS is QoS in any technology is for me personally a minefield. It's a very, very complex, very deep technology, but that is where you configure your QoS and enable it. And you can see that again we've got this concept of rolling up a configuration. So you can see QoS profile down there. and that's where you build your profiles with your different classes, and then what you're going to priority and maximum and guaranteed and so on. And then that gets rolled up into the quads there. LLDP, link layer data protocol. This is where you enable it and disable it. Remember, I suppose a thing that would be CDP, Cisco Discovery Protocol, where you can go on, you can get information, and what information is it going to share with its neighboring switches and so on, and everything, and that's configured in there. Then we have the network profile, so we've got Global Protect IPsec Crypto. The Global Protect IPsec does not use the IPsec crypto profiles that are in here. These are for the IPv6 site-to-site tunnels only. Then you got IKE gateways, that's where you create your phase 1 specifically. IPsec crypto and IKE crypto are the suites. You can see there you've got the different suites and the Diffie-Hellman groups and so on. There's also some built-in ones, so if anybody ever asks you the built-in ones, there are built-in ones, and if you've got Prisma access, of course, you'll then be able to use that. I believe they've got Palo Alto Networks and others, vendors and stuff, but they've got a standard set out for the particular encryption, authentication, and so on. Also, bear in mind as well, of course, now that with post-quantum computing, that is also the post-quantum crypto you can put in there as well. You monitor profiles, things like if you've got redundant IPsec tunnels, how do you want it to behave? Do you want it to wait and recover, so it will wait and it will keep trying, or do you want it to fail over, and then based on these thresholds? And that basically either keeps the tunnel up or down. That's also monitors are used within policy-based forwarding rules and so on. Interface management is you create an interface management profile and it can go on an interface, funnily enough, and then that provides management services to that interface, so a data interface or a loopback interface. So if you're not wanting to do stuff like we spoke about previously, we spoke about login, say for instance, if you wanted login to be on a data interface as opposed to a management interface to try and get that like for Panorama, to try and get that separation and try and release that resource need on the management interface, you'd have it there. And then because you're using data plane resources, zone protection profiles are then wrapped up into zones. So you've got, this is where you do all your flood protection, your reconnaissance protection. That's all configured in there, and then they get selected within the zones. So if we go to the zones when it finally comes on, go to the zones, and you see you've got zone protection profile in there. Again, it's building it there and putting it there. The quads profiles we talked about, LLDP profile, again, that's to go with your LLDP and your quads. And then SD-WAN is configuring the SD-WAN functionality of the firewall. Okay, so that's your network tab. So anything to do with networks is in there. Your objects tab is where, surprisingly enough, all your objects are. Go through that really quickly. I mean, there's certain stuff that doesn't need to be, like addresses and address groups make sense. If you're configuring dynamic address groups, you just configure the address group in there, and you'd call it, you'd say it's a dynamic one. Regions, where your regions are. Regions are set, so you can add a region in here, and you can add a particular region, and you can change if you want. I think the longitude and latitude of it, and say where it is, and you can add an address from that region and so on. Regional, controlling stuff by region, it's okay. It has its place, but it shouldn't be taken, in my mind anyway, it shouldn't be taken as literal because of the prevalence of VPNs and so on the internet today. You've got configure dynamic user groups here as well. So these are users that are tagged in certain ways and can come through for quarantine and so on. Again, quite an advanced configuration. Applications is where you've got your application database. There are two application databases. There is the one that you pull down your app and threat updates on dynamic updates, and then there's the ACE, the cloud application database, and that has some 9,000 more apps in it or something, and that comes as part of the DLP subscription. Application groups speak for themselves. They're a group of applications. You can create application groups. Application filters are a brilliant thing, and they allow you to adopt new apps that are within certain categories, and you create the filter there. You give the filter a name. Let's say we wanted to do media, Let's say we're trying to block high risk media, audio streaming. I don't know if there would be any. So we want to block that. So now we know that this filter here, this app filter here, is media, it's audio streaming, and it's risk 4. So if we just use that app and we use that app filter, we use that in a policy rule, and we can say we're going to block access to it. As new applications come down with that media, audio streaming, risk 4, they will be added to it by default because that filter is filtering the application database for that object. Services all go back to the old days of the HTTP and HTTPS, and this is where we can figure out TCP and UDP ports, which can be used in rules. Service groups, again, is service groups. Tags. Lots of things are very easy to use by tags. They also take an active role, as we saw when we're adding users to dynamic user groups or dynamic address groups, where you can have a tagging action. There also is an interoperability with multiple third parties as well, where the firewall will actually honor tags, so your logs get forwarded to whoever, and then there's a way that tag can be passed back and that can be acted upon in the firewall, and as well as things like integrations with Cortex XOR and XIAM and so on. Okay, devices. So device objects, as it says at the bottom, the IoT security alliance is required for feature to function. So this is really now looking at groups of devices on your network when that's populated. So you can start to control IoT, which is obviously a massive thing. Anybody who's coming in new to the industry probably won't be aware of IoT and the problems that it causes, but these are largely unmanaged devices that have some kind of internet connectivity, which often can sit on your network, very rarely patched, open to people getting onto them and then being able to traverse your network from that endpoint based on the fact that a vulnerability might exist in it. Generally things with no displays, so we're talking about, I don't know, we're talking about fridges, freezers, even dishwashers, cookers, washing machines, things like that, that just sit there and who knows what they're actually doing, but they're on the network. Anecdotally, I don't know if you do need to switch your washing machine on from afar, but who knows. And of course, the prevalence as well now of heating controls, Nest and things like this. Global Protect is HIP objects and HIP profiles. That's where we create our HIP objects. HIP objects is host information profile, and as you can see, so it's saying you're basically saying you're building a profile to say that I want to, from my Global Protect, I want the endpoint to conform to this. So for instance, is anti-malware installed? Yes or no. You would put that, you'd create that HIP object, or that HIP object already exists, and then you put it in a HIP profile, and then you'd use a HIP profile, and that can be used in security policies to enforce policies. So if you've got sensitive endpoints and you want to make sure that only compliant devices can get to it, then it can be used there. It can be used as a match condition, and only endpoints that have provided a HIP profile that match that criteria will be allowed across. Okay, external dynamic lists. These are pull-in lists from publishers. We have the standard ones here, which is the Palo Alto Networks published ones, which I won't read it out because it's just me reading it. You can see the description there. These aren't populated until they're put into a rule. When they're put into a rule, then they start getting pulled. But they will also tell you in the logs, and if you've got lots of them that aren't being referenced by a rule, it will complain at you and look pretty bad. They can be IP addresses, they can be URLs, and they're basically a way of integrating external intelligence, Palo Alto's intelligence, people like Cisco Talos, I believe it's called off the top of my head, things like that, Unit 42, Virus Total, those types of people that publish those IP lists of known bad actors. They can react very quickly, which means that if you've got these huge organizations that are looking for any malicious activity, effectively you can end up with that being on your device as a block. Any indicators of compromise, IOC, they can be on your firewall as a block within 5 minutes. You can pull that list and have it within 5 minutes, and then you're already being protected. Again, I don't think we try and sell this idea of a complete secure network. there's only one completely secure network, and that's unplug it. Unplug it from the internet. It's secure. It can't hurt you, and you can't hurt it. What we really want to do, though, is we want to close that door down as much as we possibly can, so that the chances of it happening become a lot slimmer. Custom objects. So here we have security profiles. It probably makes sense to discuss these first. These are where your antivirus things are. Antivirus is coming in. So anything that's involved in sort of HTTP, HTTP2 protocols, looking for stuff that's, any virus stuff that's inbound, also acts on stuff outbound as well, but effectively that's the way to think of it. Anti-spyware suggests external, so it's coming internal to external. And then we've got vulnerability protection, which is it's like the old IDP type idea. So you create the rules for your different vulnerabilities and what host type and so on. And that's a vulnerability protection. URL filtering, one of the classic ones is, you want to block things like adult gambling, extremism, that type of thing. You want to block that type of thing from people's ability to browse on the web, which is, you do here. And then you can create URL categories, custom URL categories that can be used in lots of match criteria. Like you can use them as exceptions. So if you're blocking a specific, say, you're blocking specific online storage or something, but your company or you want to use a specific online storage, you can block it by a category within URL filtering, but you can create a custom category, which is always, if I just show you, quickly demonstrate now. So the custom category there, if there was any custom categories, they'd be at the top here, because you've got predefined categories at the bottom, custom categories at the top. So although it would be blocked at the bottom as your online storage, you'd have an allow at the top for that, or an alert. As this is a back to basics thing, just whenever you're dealing with URL filtering, the default position for me is always alert, because if it's an allow, you don't get a log for it, so you can't baseline any of your web browsing activity. It's anonymous, so to speak. There's no log created for it. And this is also where you do your user credential detection. So are you looking for stuff within, are they putting company credentials or whatever credential you choose? HTTP header insertion, so on, and inline categorization, again using that CDSS, that cloud delivered security services, using that kind of data and that kind of ability to expand your detection and blocking capabilities. And then you've got URL filtering settings for, what you're going to enforce on people. File blocking speaks for itself. It is file blocking. It's like if you want to block PDFs, you want to create a continue function for people who are uploading or downloading certain files. Like here we have the best practice, which lives on Panorama, which in this case is SCM, but and the rule name is block all risky file types. So we're saying these are the risky file types. Best practice one. Direction both. You can have upload or download. You can see we've got upload there, and you can have download there, and then block, alert, and the different actions for that will be continue and so on. When they get continue pages to make them think about it. Wildfire analysis. This is where we configure. I mean, basically, all you're really going to configure here, I suppose, is you'd want to check for pretty much anything anyway, I guess. So you'd have both upload or download, what applications, what file types you want to look at, and then you'd look at whether, I guess the biggest thing here would be public cloud or private. If you've got a lot of sensitive information, you probably don't want that being sent to a public cloud, regardless of how secure it is. So some people there is a private Wildfire appliance that you can buy and you can have in your data center, and then you can send that there. DOS protection, denial of service protection. This is different from zone protection because this is then done. It's specifically SIM flood or resource protection, and it's aggregate or classified, and there's lots of different connotations around that. But this is basically you're trying to protect specific resources within, rather than the zone and just hitting the zone. You're trying to security profile groups. This is where you wrap up your security profiles into a group, give it a group name, then it's easy just to apply all of the specific security profiles to a rule. That'll be the next video when we look at building policies and so on. Log forwarding. We've got our log forwarding rules, and this is where we start to see as well, we have the power of the tags and so on. So if we want to create a rule, we can actually have a tag here. So we've got a built-in action, and then we can tag that log with that. The firewall sees this as well, and then we can take an action based on that log. As well, we can add a tag and remove a tag. So we can add a tag and remove it to the say like address groups or user groups. So if we're going to add a user, then we're going to target the user, and we're going to add a tag of this to that user. So if we start to see threat logs from a specific user, and we've got a quarantined users group, we can then tag that. Those threat logs will go through, they'll tag that user. That user will then become part of that group dynamically in the background, and then that user group is used in a quarantine rule, and then that user becomes quarantined by virtue of risky behavior. Authentication rules. So the authentication rules are used for this is an authentication profile, but they use an authentication rules, and that's where you want to then have a second authentication to get to places, or if you use an authentication portal or so on, and then that's where you configure that. Is it going to be the web form? So it's just a web form. Browser challenge. So then the browser supplies the details, and then default no captive portal. So that's where your authentication profiles are configured. Your decryption profiles. Decryption profiles are used within your decryption rules, strangely enough, and they govern really the quality of the SSL or TLS that you're going to allow and you're happy with. So, looking at this here, so you got SSL forward proxy and SSL inbound inspection. Just to help out with context, so SSL forward proxy at the time of doing. SSL forward proxy is literally just a proxy. Client connects to firewall. Firewall then terminates that SSL connection and creates a separate SSL connection to the internet. And then that is in plain text going across the firewall. The vast majority of security profiles require that to function as efficiently as possible. SSL inbound inspection is slightly different. It's stream based, which means that you need the private key from whatever server you've got in your internal network, and then it's then decrypting as it goes through. It's able to see that traffic in plain text coming through. So if you want to protect things like web servers or whatever you've got on the internet, you can use SSL inbound inspection, and then that will help when you're creating rules for the security profiles that are on there. And then we have like no decryption. Do we want to allow expired certs or untrusted issuers? So if you want, as a general rule within your environment, you don't want people to be able to go to websites with untrusted issuers, then you can simply block that. And then if they hit one with an untrusted issuer, the firewall will sever the connection. SD-WAN link management is where you configure everything around your SD-WAN. I'm not going to talk about that too much because it's a bit beyond me. It's not something I've really ever dealt with, so I'm not going to try and lead anybody down the garden path. But effectively, you can see here again, you've got things like path quality profiles. Probably people watching this who know a lot more about this than me. And you can kind of see where your path quality, your SAS quality, where that is all configured within here, and then to be added to your SD-WAN link sort of later on. And then you have schedules. We have pre-made schedules for things that we're going to do. So we'll create a schedule, and then that schedule can be used for a scheduled rule, for instance, or right. And then quickly and we'll go on to the ACC and monitor. Okay, so on the monitor tab, I've actually removed the source and destination addresses to avoid doxing myself, so we can just quickly run through the different types of logs. Okay, so as a general rule, everything is logged at session end. If you want to start doing any troubleshooting or something like that of traffic that's not working, I would suggest select log at session start. Okay, so here you have a little magnifying glass. You click on a little magnifying glass and it gives you a pop out, and that will give you extended information about what you doing. But that gives you greater context. And you've got NAT source IP to alter these columns. You can shift them along. You can drag and drop them. If you want to go in there and adjust the add columns, remove columns, so you can see different information, that's where you would do that. This is where we see our threat logs as well. So we can see our threat logs. We can see the zone and where it's going to, internet zone, and we can see file names and so on of different things, and the threat ID and the name. And again, if you click into it, you can then see the name, and it will give you more context about that. You can go to the threat vault as well. URL filtering. Okay, no great mystery here. It's URL filtering. It will give you the category, the URL category list. One important thing here, the IPs make no difference here because they're just all public IPs. But so one of the things here to look at is the order of the categories. So if you're seeing something being blocked, this is the category that it basically, this is the sequence in which it matched the categories. So you've got computer and internet info, which would be the first one. If it had been low risk, would be the first one that it matched on. Then that would be there because that is the category that the action was taken on. So Microsoft here, for instance, will exist in computer and internet info. Okay, then Wildfire. So when we look on Wildfire, we can see that it's actually got one that it's sent to Wildfire, which was this services URLs JavaScript. It come back as being benign. There's a lot of different things around Wildfire and what it actually does, and it doesn't actually block it straight away, but it allows you to find afterwards what isn't been blocked. So in data filterings, this is files that are being sent and whether they've been allowed or not. So this is, in this particular instance, it's a OneDrive setup file that it's denying because it's a Microsoft PE file, so it's a executable file, and that is part of my data filtering. Hit matches, there's no point showing it because there's nothing on there, but hit match is going to be with Global Protect and things like that, where a hit policy exists. What have your users matched? Were they matching a specific policy? Global Protect is Global Protect logs, what portal you logged into, what the gateway was, what stage it was, what event it was. So is it log on, is it pre-log on? And then your public IPv4 addresses and the host ID and so on, giving you all that rich data about what happened. So if you've got a Global Protect issue, you've got somebody who can't connect to Global Protect. On the earlier versions, it's not in there. This appeared, I can't remember what version it was 9.1, I think. It appeared as its own log. IP tagging. What's been tagged, what's not been tagged. User ID logs, everything around user ID. You can see here I've got some domain test user stuff going through. I've put it in there by XML API. This was quite some time ago. And then you've got test user by captive portal. So it's where's your user ID come from? User ID logs. Literally, as you get user ID, you get user ID logs. Decryption. So where you have a decryption policy, so I've got an internet decrypt policy, and I've got my source address and my destination address in this one again because it's all Microsoft. So it makes no never mind. You've got the policy, the issue of common names, certificate start date, certificate end date, so everything to do with that. Whether the root status was trusted or untrusted. So the root status of that, whether it was trusted, there's lots of reasons why that could be. You could be missing an intermediate. In fact, that's usually the biggest thing as well. So if you have a chain of certificates and you start to see things like untrusted or fatal errors due to it being untrusted, if you look and check in your device and your trusted root CAs, you'll see it in there. Tunnel inspections for inspection in tunnels. There won't be anything in here necessarily because I haven't got anything. So it's tunnel ID and then it's inspecting it, and then you've got security rule and tunnel inspection rule, and so you can start to enforce policy on tunnels. Configuration logs are just what configurations have been made on the system. System logs, that's where you'll see things like IPsec failing, root D failing over and stuff like that. Alarms are, you can set alarms, audible alarms even and stuff like that for varying conditions on the device. which are set in the device section. Authentication logs to captive portals and so on. And then unified is usually really good because if with unified logs, you get a mixture of all them. So you'll see the traffic, the threat, and the URL filtering and things like that all in one log, where you can filter on a source address that's having a problem, for instance, and you can try and nail down where that is based on the fact you can see all the logs sort of in one place as opposed to flicking around. Packet captures, where you do packet captures on the firewall. So you have the stages through the firewall and you have the packet captures. Again, the actual packet capture thing itself is quite an in-depth thing. App scope, so you can have a look at the apps, your top 5 gainers, so what applications are gaining in popularity, what applications are being used, bandwidth consuming apps, change monitor, threat monitor. You can see how things are changing, how has suddenly something sprung up, if you suddenly started sending terabytes of data somewhere. The threat monitor is threats. This is all about literally looking at data to see what's happening in your networks. You can look at threats, top 10, and filter based on what type of threat you're looking at. Threat map, geographical map, really does need the firewall itself to be placed longitude and latitude in device. Network monitor is network monitor. You can see IPsec there, for instance. So you can look at applications, source users, source addresses, see what's going on in the network. Again, it's all about actual network. So you've got sessions there for IPsec and so on. Traffic map, where's your traffic going to? Again, in a big environment, you'd see things sort of. You'd see lines coming to and from the firewall. Session browser is active sessions through the firewall. If you have a session that isn't working or something like that, and it isn't in the log, it might be because session hasn't been torn down. If you look at the session browser, you'll be able to see that there are sessions in the session browser, and you can look into them and you can look and see the details about it and whether it's state active or discard or something. Botnets is botnet reporting, and you can see, have you had any botnets been reported or so on. IoT devices, that's what we said before about, so your IoT, you need the IoT license. You can see summary and asset inventory of all your IoT devices that the firewall's seen. And then PDF reports is where you do all your reporting, so you can run a report. If you look at reports in general, that gives you the idea. So you've got custom reports there that you can create, application reports, and then when you click into them, you'll see there's a highlighted there for the third. Can't go back any further, I don't think, because it's only been fired up. So you got for the third there, and then that is scheduled. Then that will run, I believe, at 1 o'clock every morning for the standard reports, which is the application, PDF, the URL filtering, threat reports, and so on. And you can create custom reports as well as templating for custom reports. Right, so that's 40 minutes nearly. I'm going to leave it there. I'll cover the device tab and the ACC in another video. And then after that, we're going to move on to building policies and how the security profiles work. So I hope that's been informative. I hope that's helped. Any questions, please leave them below. As always, if you made it this far, I'm shocked. But if you have, then please like and subscribe, and I will catch